All right, so in this breakout, I'm going to show you my preferred way of structuring an Angular app with all the files and everything. And I say my preferred because there are a million one ways to do it. Really no right way. There are things like jump, hop, a style guide and stuff like that. I'll basically be doing what he does and building it out from scratch. So we start here with a blank Reddit app. The first thing I do is just create a new folder and call it app. And then all of my Angular code is going to go inside of that app folder. Then inside of app, I create an app.js. And this is going to be my Angular module. And actually, let me just name it. Let's rename it. Let's just say app.module.js. So this is going to contain my actual Angular module. So let's create it. Create an IIFE. Inside of there, I will use strict. Inside of there, I will say Angular.module. I'm going to call this Reddit. And I'll specify a blank array because we have no dependencies. So this file, it's literally all it's going to do. It's just defining the module. But then let's actually bring it into the page. So on HTML, I will do ng-app is equal to Reddit. That name matches the name of this module that I've created. And then down here, I need to bring in Angular. We can go into node module /Angular/Angular.js. And so now we've hooked up my module to this page. Now the next thing I would do is actually create a folder for the feature that I'm working on. And in our case, we just have one big feature set. We'll call it posts. So right inside of app, I'll create a new folder, call it posts. And now all of my code for posts can go inside of that folder. And so now in posts, I will create a new file. And actually, I'm going to create a separate file for the controller and a separate file for the component and a separate file for the template. So inside of here, I'm going to say posts.controller.js. I'm going to go over here, copy the code from my module, paste it into this controller, and then remove the array. Because inside of this file, we no longer, we don't want to create the module. We want to take that existing module and put a controller on it. So right here, I'm just going to say controller. This is going to be the posts controller. And I realize you may not have seen this before, but it'll all make sense once I create the component and bring things in. So I'm actually creating my controller separate from my component. So post controller, and then this is the post controller. And then down here, I'll actually define a function, call it post controller. And in here, I can do something like VM equals this. Like this is your controller. You can do all the same things that you would do. And here, I'm just going to log hello from the posts controller. So this line right here is getting a reference to the existing module because I did not specify that array, right? So it's say, get that module that already exists and put this controller on it called post controller. Good to go. So now in my index.html, I need to bring in, well, first I need to bring in that app.js. So app/app.module.js. Then I need to bring in this controller that I just created. So app/post/post-controller. So got my controller, got my module. Let's create a component in this folder. So now in this folder, I'm going to create a new file, call it posts.component. Inside of here, I'm going to kind of do the same thing, just copy this, but now instead of a controller, I want to make a component. Here, I'm just going to call this posts, and a component accepts an object. It has a controller property. Now in my case, because I define that controller in another file, I can just give it the name of the controller. So your controller, Mr. Post Component, should be the post controller. And then I can also specify a template URL. So here I'll say template URL, and this will be a file. It's going to be app/posts/posts.html. And that's all that's required for that component. So now I need to create that template, but once this component gets created, it'll use that controller that I defined in that other file. All through Angular magic. Like Angular will know that this controller was registered somewhere by this name, and then in this component, because I'm referencing that controller by name, it's going to use that same controller. Now the last thing I need is a view. So we'll do posts.html. Just do an h1. We'll say this is the posts view. Cool. So I got lots of files. Things are talking to each other. Let's see if it works. So now in index.html, make this work. How am I going to make this work? I need to add, bring in that component that I created. So this component is called posts. So here I can just throw in posts, like that. And if I did everything right, we should see hello from the post view. Let's see. Didn't do it right.
I noticed
Yeah.
you capitalized the post controller. I don't know if you capitalized it the first time, but when you referenced it, it was capitalized.
Yeah, I guess I did capitalize. Oh, I'm not bringing in the component file. Yeah. So posts.component. So, yeah, I think tomorrow I might do a breakout on Gulp and basically how to automatically insert all of these script tags or how to make a single script tag out of all of those files. That's, yeah, that kind of thing. But, okay, so I'm bringing in my module, bringing in my controller, bringing in my component. And there it is. This is the post view. Cool. And we says hello from the post controller. So this is probably maybe even a little bit more modular than you've seen in the curriculum, but this is pretty much the style that you'd be writing in your code. So for the Reddit clone, I would actually just put the entire Reddit clone inside of this component, because right now you don't know about services, you haven't really learned about more advanced things in components, so it'd be pretty hard to have different components communicating with each other. Like this component needs to push a value into an array that another component is repeating over. We haven't really talked about how you can link those together. So for now, when you're doing the Reddit clone, basically if you set up your file structure like this, and then all of your code is just going to go in either this post controller inside of here, or in this posts view. And I think if you look at the README, yeah, they provide all of the example code. So I could literally just take all that example code, throw that into my post view, save it, see what we get. Yeah, I'm going to get some basic stuff. I think I need to bring in Bootstrap. CDN. Git URL. Boot swatch. That one. Slate. Save it. Yay! And then I would actually go in and modify my controller and add some bindings in the view and stuff like that. Any questions on what I have done here? Or would you like to see other things? Or actually, let me try to open everything up at the same time. So let's do that. And then we'll do this module. It's going to be split down, split up. Oh God.
Syntax question.
Definitely.
Where you have Angular and then a space dot module, do you have like a plugin that allows you to ignore the enter? Because if I do a new space, I don't think it works.
Just a second. Let me. I can do this. Okay. So down here is our module. We define it. Up here is our controller that we put on the module. And then down here is our component that references that controller and then references the view. And then we bring that component in right there. So what was your question, Phil? Sorry.
I was just curious. It was like, I guess, syntax. Like you have Angular module and
Yeah.
the module. When I give it enter a new line, I don't think it works.
Oh, you just have a different syntax highlighter. It's still totally valid JavaScript, because as long as there's not a semicolon right there, JavaScript realizes that, hey, there's a period, so that actually belongs there. I can send you my syntax highlighting theme that I'm using. I think yours just shows it a different color, but it should still work.
Yeah, I can get down on your highlighting.
What's that?
I could use your highlights.
It's called Brawlhalla. Mike?
What's the advantage to where we did that in the bottom left corner, to where you created it, and over the other side you referenced it? Why not just do it all together?
To keep my file separate, like this controller file is going to get really, really long, and if I left the controller and the component all in one single file, I'd end up with like 1,000 lines. Now the component and the module file, those stay exactly the same. Now all of my code is going to go inside of the controller, because the idea is I could potentially have other components on this app and other controllers, and if I were to put them all in this one file, it would get really, really big. So right now it doesn't make as much sense because there's not a lot of code, but as your apps get bigger and bigger, you want to follow this format so that way you can have one place for your module and then everywhere else just references that module. Questions? Comments?
I may have missed it, but when you're referencing the other files, like you have Reddit here established, all I need to do is pull it in with the module Reddit.
Yeah, and leave off the array.
So that's like the required.
Yeah, that's basically like requiring the Reddit module. But you're requiring it, and then you are saying put this component on that existing module, so it has access to it.
I see.
And that way, in the HTML, we'll say this whole app has access to that module, and then here I want to use this component, and because we added the component to that module, this actually works. This actually shows up. Cool. I think I could probably share this. Like it's just setup code. But as your apps grow, they'll basically take this format, but then instead of just a post folder, you might actually have several different folders in there for like each page in your app, each one that does a different thing. They might all have their own separate modules too. So like right now I put everything on the Reddit module. It's also possible to create like a submodule. Actually, let me just do that, just create it real quick. So I'll create a new file. Let's call this post.module.js. And here's what I'm going to do. In this module, it's going to have a new name, but it's going to be reddit.posts. Posts. And the name is just because it's inside of my app, and I know that post is like a child of Reddit. I could literally just call this module posts if I wanted to, but I'm going to call it reddit.posts. So now that I have it as a separate module, the page shouldn't work. Oh, I gotta load that file in. And I have to update all of those other things. So bring in posts/posts.module, and then in my post component, this should be reddit.posts is the name of the module now. And this controller, the module is now named reddit.posts. Quick break. Okay, so my component is on this different module now. My controller is on that different module as well, and then I've actually defined the module there. So now when I refresh the page, it can't see anything because there's nothing on the Reddit module anymore. But here's what I do. I say, hey, Reddit module, you have a dependency on that module. And so now the Reddit module has access to everything inside of there, and it works. So the idea here is you could have separate folders, each with their own module, each with components and controllers on them, and then you have one module file that references all those other things in it.
Why would you want to do that?
Just for separation of concerns, because when I say module.component, I'm adding a component to that specific module. And if you have a really big app and you're putting all of your components on the same module, things could conflict. So by separating out into individual modules, you're guaranteed that each module is like consolidated and has its own things and won't interfere with other modules.
So it's based on features then?
Yeah, it would be by feature. So the feature by folder or folder by feature thing, typically, and when you're looking through John Papa Style Guide, each feature folder has its own module that's then just referenced in the main module. Alrighty, that's all I had for you. Any other questions or concerns or comments about modular file structure?
CJ, I was reading in those docs and what you guys were saying. Are those always IFs
Yeah, and the idea is by staying modular, you're preventing yourself from polluting global scope. So everything inside this IIFE is confined inside the IIFE, and so anytime I'm creating anything else, it's always inside an IIFE.
Look, except for the controller, it knows what it is across the board.
Well, no, like all these are in IIFEs too, so that's in an IIFE. That's an IIFE.
Just say it one more time. How did the name of the controller is able to be used across all of those files again?
Like, how do I reference the controller in
Yeah.
here? Yeah. When you register the controller. So this first parameter is the name of the controller,
Yeah.
and the second parameter is that controller function. They're named the exact same thing, but technically I could call this function anything I want, and it would still work because I've named it post controller right there.
Okay.
And then in the component,
Yeah. Okay.
I'm using that exact same name. So this should still work. We should still see hello from the post controller. But it's really common practice. Like you name the function the same thing as the controller. Cool.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'll upload this to YouTube. Have a wonderful day.